On the night of November 12th, 2001, Kabul did not sleep. The city was wrapped in an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant echo of explosions, the whine of aircraft high above the clouds, and the hurried footsteps of men who knew something the rest of the world did not. Taliban fighters were abandoning their checkpoints. Commanders were vanishing in the darkness. Radios crackled with confused orders, and the people of Kabul waited, not knowing who would rule their city by sunrise. Just 9 days earlier, the idea that the United States, or its Afghan allies, could take Kabul seemed almost impossible. The Taliban had ruled Afghanistan for 5 years. They controlled almost every major city. Their fighters were hardened by decades of warfare. They knew the mountains, the valleys, the ambush routes. Empires had failed here before, and yet the impossible was unfolding at breathtaking speed. This is the story of how the U.S. military, using air power, intelligence, and a small network of elite troops, helped bring about the fall of Kabul in just 9 days, one of the fastest collapses of a regime in modern warfare. But to understand how it happened, we must go back to the moment when the world changed forever. On September 11th, 2001, four hijacked airplanes struck the heart of the United States. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. Within hours, American intelligence identified the mastermind behind the attacks: Osama bin Laden, leader of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, a group that had been operating under the protection of the Taliban government in Afghanistan. The message from Washington was clear and uncompromising: hand over Al-Qaeda or face war. The Taliban refused. 3 weeks later, on October 7th, 2001, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom. Cruise missiles streaked through the night sky. Stealth bombes cruza continents. Afghanistan, the land that had broken the British Empire and the Soviet Union, was once again at war. But this time, something was different. The U.S. did not send massive ground armies at first. Instead, it used a revolutionary combination of air power, special forces, satellite intelligence, and local allies, a strategy that would redefine warfare in the 21st century. While the Taliban ruled most of Afghanistan, they were not without enemies. In the north, a coalition known as the Northern Alliance had been fighting them for years. These fighters were Afghan, but they were not Taliban. They were Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Hazaras, men who had lost their cities, families, and homes. For years, they had been beaten back, slowly and painfully. Now suddenly, they had a powerful new ally. U.S. Special Forces teams, small units of less than 12 men, were flown into the rugged mountains of northern Afghanistan. They rode on horseback with alliance fighters. They carried laser designators instead of large weapons. Their real power was not their rifles. It was the American Air Force waiting above the clouds. When these teams marked a target, destruction followed within minutes. Taliban trenches that had held for years vanished in seconds. Tanks were destroyed before their crews even knew they were under attack. Supply routes were erased from the map. And with every explosion, the psychological balance of the war shifted. The Taliban had never faced anything like this. In early November 2001, after weeks of relentless airstrikes, the moment arrived. On November 4th, U.S. Special Forces coordinated one of the first major ground and air assaults with the Northern Alliance near the city of Mazar-i-Sharif, a key stronghold in northern Afghanistan. Within days, the city fell. The Taliban's northern defense collapsed almost overnight. This was the shock that triggered everything. When Mazar-i-Sharif fell, the myth of Taliban invincibility shattered. Fighters deserted. Commanders lost control. Supply lines collapsed. And across Afghanistan, whispers spread: the Americans cannot be stopped. Now the path to Kabul is open. As Northern Alliance fighters surged southward with U.S. air support, Taliban forces stationed along the route to Kabul began to panic. They were no longer fighting an enemy they could see. The enemy was invisible, watching from satellites and drones, striking from the sky with impossible precision. Entire Taliban units abandoned their positions without firing a shot. Fuel depots exploded before trucks could move. Reinforcements were destroyed before they arrived. Night was no longer protection. American aircraft ruled the darkness. Every mile closer to Kabul increased the pressure inside the capital. Taliban leaders knew the truth before anyone else did. Kabul could not be defended. Back in Kabul, anxiety spread through the streets. Shops closed early. Roads emptied. Families gathered indoors, whispering rumors. Some said the Americans were days away. Others said the Taliban would fight to the last man. But inside Taliban headquarters, the reality was far more desperate. Their supply routes were broken. Their air defenses were useless. Their commanders were divided. And worst of all, their fighters no longer believed they could win. On November 12th, the order was given, not to fight, but to flee. Under the cover of darkness, Taliban forces began abandoning Kabul, slipping out through back roads, destroying records, discarding uniforms, and fading into the countryside. They left behind checkpoints. They left behind weapons. And they left behind a city holding its breath. By morning, everything would change, and Kabul would fall without a final battle. While Kabul trembled in suspense, the real battle was unfolding hundreds of kilometers away, on dusty plains, frozen mountain passes, and hidden desert airstrips. This was not a traditional invasion. It was a war fought by aircraft in the sky and a few dozen elite soldiers on the ground, guiding destruction with invisible hands. At the heart of America's strategy was a simple truth. To collapse an enemy, you don't have to destroy every soldier. You only need to break their ability to fight back. And that is exactly what the U.S. military did. Unlike past conflicts, the United States did not send massive armored divisions into Afghanistan at the start. Instead, it deployed TIA Opératives, Army Green Berets, Air Force Combat Contrôlé, Navy SEAL elements. These teams worked in total secrecy. They did not carry heavy equipment. They were local clothes. Some rode horses through terrain where tanks could not travel. Their mission was not to fight the Taliban directly. It was to turn Afghan fighters into guided weapons for American air power. Each team carried satellite radios that connected directly to U.S. bombers flying thousands of meters above the earth. When Northern Alliance forces encountered Taliban defenses, the Americans did not charge forward. They simply called the sky. Within minutes of a radio call, American B-52 bombers, F-15 strike fighters, and AC-130 gunships appeared overhead. Laser-guided bombs fell with devastating accuracy. Entire Taliban positions were erased without a single American soldier firing a bullet. The psychological impact was even greater than the physical destruction. Taliban fighters began to understand a terrifying new reality. There was nowhere to hide. Mountains offered no protection. Trenches were useless. Even movement itself became deadly because American satellites could track it. What once took months of slow, brutal fighting now took hours. This is the way collapse happened so fast. As lines of defense crumbled in the north, the Northern Alliance advanced with a speed no one expected. Town after town fell. Each victory gave them more weapons, more vehicles, and more fighters who defected from the Taliban. By November 9th, the Taliban's northern command structure had effectively ceased to exist. And behind the scenes, U.S. intelligence was already focused on the ultimate prize. Inside Taliban leadership circles, panic spread like wildfire. Their commanders had expected a slow war, a grinding conflict in the mountains that would drain American will, just as it had drained Soviet power years earlier. But they were facing a force that did not need long supply chains inside Afghanistan. American aircraft had unlimited reach. Their intelligence was global. Their precision was unmatched. Worse still, many Taliban fighters were not ideologically committed. They were local recruits, tribal fighters, or men who had joined for survival rather than belief. When defeat seemed inevitable, they chose to save themselves. Entire units vanished overnight. Kabul was not designed to withstand a modern air campaign. It had no effective radar network, no anti-air missile systems capable of challenging American aircraft, no meaningful air force of its own. If the Taliban attempted to defend the city, government buildings would be destroyed, Command centers would be eliminated. Supply routes would be shattered. Civilian casualties would skyrocket. They faced a terrible choice: fight and lose the city in ruins, or retreat and preserve their forces for guerrilla warfare later. The decision was made in silence. They would abandon Kabul. As retreat plans began, the U.S. intensified its air campaign around the capital. Roads leading out of Kabul were monitored. Convoys were targeted. Bridges were destroyed to control movement. This was not just a military operation. It was a controlled shutdown of the Taliban's ability to function as a government. Communication collapsed. Command chains broke. Fear replaced orders. By November 12th, Taliban leaders in Kabul knew that by staying, they risked complete annihilation. So they disappeared into the night. When the sun rose on November 13th, 2001, the impossible had happened. Northern Alliance scouts approached the outskirts of Kabul and found no resistance. No gunfire, no defenses, no checkpoints. The Taliban were gone. This is not the end of chapter. This is the first part of my video. Soon next will come. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel so that every story remember you about American powers and world situation.